In this video, we have intense heat building throughout the week, but a big cool down is on the way for some as the monsoonal flow will only increase and a coastal low develops, as we'll also be watching the tropics. Welcome back, everyone. Pal Ponder on Weather here with another update. This is your first day of official summer, and it's going to feel like summer for many of you. So let's take a look at the overall water vapor imagery this morning. You can really kind of tell what's happening. We've got a lot of dry air actually going to be filtering into the Pacific Northwest as the atmospheric river tends to kind of shut off now, as we have a pretty strong low pressure system that'll be lifting up into Canada. But you can actually see where the cold front is right now, as the monsoonal flow will be coming off New Mexico. That's going to be setting the stage for some storm development later on this afternoon. But look at the backside. On the backside of this ridge, you're on the cooler side up here into the northeast. But you can tell where this dome of high pressure really is locked and loaded over parts of this area right here with a lot of sinking air. And then we have another tropical storm out here into the open waters of the Pacific. But we are watching several waves that are coming off the African coast. This one's actually entering portions of Trinidad this morning into Barbados. And there's another one on the backside of here. And then we also have another one coming off the African coast. So we'll be watching these traverse across the Caribbean over the coming days. So now let's take a look at the overall setup for yesterday, because we had a lot of intense storms out there. In fact, these are the storm reports for yesterday. There were actually 2 reported tornadoes up there in South Dakota, but numerous wind reports, preliminary reports up to about 164 wind reports yesterday and 43 hail reports. Some of the standouts, because they did actually increase the intensity of that severe thunderstorm watch yesterday. I posted about it. Up to 90 miles an hour they were anticipating, with some tennis ball sized hail. And that did in fact actually end up verifying. And some of these areas in Nebraska, you can see some of the larger stones was like 3¼ inches. That is definitely some very damaging hail happened up there. But numerous reports of tennis ball, which is 2½ inches, and several reports of golf ball to even ping pong size hail. But yes, the 90-mile-per-hour winds did in fact actually verify, with a 91-mile-per-hour wind gust up here in Minnesota, Mallory, Minnesota. And there was also numerous reports well to the 80s, if not the upwards of hurricane force wind gusts, with another wind gust of 85 miles an hour into Nebraska. That was yesterday, with numerous power outages. Today, I don't think the storms are going to be as intense, but what will be intense is the heat that'll just be building up here and for much of the country. They actually hit 102 yesterday into Houston, which was a record-breaking temperatures. But look into the northeast. That Caribou, Maine actually had a record low of 38 degrees this morning. They're only going to make it up to 68. So if you're in the backside of this ridge, you're like, pal, what's all this heat you're talking about? I mean, it's like comfortable in the 60s and 70s up there. So it feels really cool and really nice up there, really kind of pleasant weather. But just along that ridge, we've got a little bit that instability, and all that increased heat is going to be into play. But check out New Mexico with that monsoonal flow, and all those daily rain showers are moving in. They're going to be hard pressed to get into the 80s today up there in a good chunk of New Mexico. But cooler conditions up here into portions of Montana, as the desert Southwest and much of the West Coast starts to actually heat up. So you've been experiencing really nice, pleasant, cooler conditions up here in the Pacific Northwest. But I think as we go throughout the week, and especially into this weekend, things are going to be changing in a big way, and you're starting to feel those well above average temperatures on the way. But for today, along that cool front, we are going to be having increased instability. It's more of a conditional threat. I don't really see that a significant event today, but we could be looking at some stronger storms in and around, say, Milwaukee area, getting into Kansas City, into Madison, into Des Moines, portions of northwestern Illinois. Some of those storms on, later on this afternoon into the early evening hours could get a little bumpy for about an hour or two up here. So definitely just kind of be on the lookout, but nothing to be terribly too concerned with. But going into tomorrow, I think we're going to have a little bit more increased instability. We're going to have the monsoonal flow will actually, continue for a good chunk of New Mexico. There'll be a crease along this boundary, so we could be looking at some more heavier rains into portions of Kansas. There's really kind of a light scattered rains in and around Missouri into Illinois and Indiana, going into Kentucky. But I think we have a lot more increased instability, especially as we get to the early evening time frame, going into the nighttime hours till about midnight up here into the Northeast. We're going to be looking at a pretty significant storm. They're going to be breaking out. In fact, they actually highlighted a slight risk for severe storms. And I think a lot of this instability does in fact take place towards about the 6 o'clock hour to the midnight hour. So we could be looking at some really heavy rains setting up shop into portions of Baltimore, getting into DC area, going into portions of Virginia, into portions of West Virginia, as well as all the way into Maryland here. So all this boundary here, even draping across into portions of Indiana and Ohio, coming up on your Wednesday time frame, as we'll be looking at increased activity and the heavier rainfall. So we do have a slight risk for excessive rainfall into portions of New Mexico where the monsoonal flow will increase. We do have another boundary up here along that little boundary into portions of Kansas, some of the marginal increased heavier rain activity, but the most significant heavier rains are going to be setting up over portions of upstate New York into portions, getting into Pennsylvania. I think it increases down here, say in the DC area, Delaware. I think even portions of New York. Well, this whole area will be kind of under the gun on your Wednesday. I think a lot of this instability doesn't really take place until the early evening hour, going into the nighttime hours, and it kind of subsides towards the midnight time frame. Here's a kind of an example of that. Around 10 o'clock Wednesday night, we could be looking at some pretty strong thunderstorms over portions of West Virginia, getting into the DC and the Baltimore area, into Philadelphia, coming out of New York here into Albany, over Hartford, New York City, into Jersey. Could be looking at some heavier rains into portions of Concord. This goes all the way up into along the coast here into Rhode Island. So I think that 6 p.m. to midnight time frame, you got to be on high alert from those storms. It could be packing some quarter-size hail with it, some stronger wind gusts of 60 to 70 miles an hour. And you can't actually even rule out a tornado threat too. They do have a 2% chance up here of an isolated spin up, but some increased flooding is definitely a little bit of more of a concern as we get into the nighttime hours. So, but this is kind of give you an idea of where the rain is going to be over the next 48 hours. This is between now and say Thursday morning. There's your monsoonal flow, increased activity. That's why they do have that slight risk for excessive rainfall into portions of New Mexico, reaches portions of southern Colorado. And then they have that marginal risk over Kansas, subtle scattered storms over traversing across Missouri, a little bit higher instability into Kentucky. But once you get up into the mid-Atlantic and especially up here into the Northeast, there's your heavier rainfalls. 1 to 3 inches is definitely not out of the question up there, but really dry, starting to dry out into a good chunk of the Pacific Northwest as that ridge will start to build up there for you. But as we transfer into your Thursday time frame, there's the monsoonal flow will continue to take effect. I think the ridge just kind of builds and deepens for much of the week. So we got numerous records on the table as plenty of 100-degree heat, as that intense heat just kind of really builds and intensifies later on this week. And especially as we get into this weekend, we've got some storm development on Thursday in the midsection of the country. We could be looking at some just kind of marginally risk severe storms, but we do have our coastal low that's actually going to be developing off the East Coast here. So we'll be having to watch this have an increased instability as it heads towards through the Carolinas and it kind of fishtails down here into portions of Florida as we get deeper into the weekend. So there's your Friday high temperatures and you can see where the ridge of high pressure is going to be pretty much dominating, which all these little yellow circle areas, those are your anticipated record highs. And you start getting deeper into the end of the June, some of these record highs for Texas are actually kind of way up there. It's actually one of the starts from the 1980 massive intense heat wave. So it's gonna be hard to break some records in Texas going in, Thursday and beyond, but it's still gonna have plenty of heat, records or not. You're gonna have 105s on the maps showing up in chunks of Texas, 102 again in Houston. So yeah, plenty of intense heat to can be concerned about as we get especially into the Thursday time frame. But all that heat really builds into Oklahoma, into Kansas, goes all the way into Nebraska. But underneath that, we're still on the cooler side up here in Maine and much of the actually Northeast, and even into Montana. I mean, they're experiencing this cooler conditions, but look at the temperature starting to warm into the Pacific Northwest as we're starting to have hundreds show up on the map on into California. But yeah, underneath that, as we go into your Saturday time frame, look where the coastal low is, right? So we've got that coastal low setting up over portions of the Carolinas. That'll actually increased moisture into Florida as we go into your Saturday time frame. We're watching a cold front, right? Here's a hurricane out here into the open waters of the Pacific. Pretty dry out here in the Pacific Northwest. There's your monsoonal flow. As the ridge will start to deepen back over Texas, that'll shift a little bit of the ridge further and further into Texas. That will actually push the monsoonal flow further into Arizona by then. So if you've been missing out on the monsoon, I think you will have increased instability and increased opportunities for more rain entering portions of Arizona into Utah, but that actually won't take place until we get deeper into the weekend, as that ridge will start to build back over Texas, waiting for some signs of a cold front, right? So where's that cold front, pal? So we have to take a look at the upper atmosphere at this time of year. This is the 850s. This is about 5,000 feet up in the atmosphere. Any signs of a change and a breakdown of the ridge of high pressure? And there are subtle signs of it on the way, but what's the significant change is the big increase in temperatures in a good chunk of the Pacific Northwest, where they're going to have well above average temperature anomalies as we get into deeper into the weekend, especially by Sunday. But this purple area sticks out like a sore thumb, right? It's cold. It's colder up aloft, right? How much does that actually sink to the surface? I mean, of course, this is the end of June, right? So as this increases, well, I think we'll have, depending on the timing, you'll probably hit one more day of triple digits say into the Dallas-Worth area. That cold front ain't making it to Houston, guys. I'm sorry. It's at the end of June. It just, these cold fronts only sink that far south, but you can see where the cooler conditions will be. And as we get into Monday, I think it does sink further enough south where at least the triple digits will be gone in Dallas. You'll have some sort of reprieve from the heat by then. I think you're still into the upper 90s, if not triple digits, down along the coast into the Houston area. But you can see where the cold front is draped across Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma definitely experiences that cool front, especially into Kansas. I mean, north of there, where these green shaded areas, you're going to be experiencing that little cooler boundary of air. But you can actually see this little swirl off here on the Florida coast. That's our surface low. That's our coastal low that we've been tracking all for the last several days. I think it'll be setting up and kind of sinking a little bit into the Florida area by the time we get into Monday. There's the overall water transport index to kind of give you an idea. I think, this will be a hurricane by then. This will be actually the third hurricane out here in the open waters of the Pacific. As this hurricane will continue to shift off and then more or less really kind of fizzle out as it goes into the cooler waters. But that'll be another opportunity where we do have increased water vapor transferring into Arizona. But you can see just subtle signs, right? There's a lot of clearing on the backside, a lot of dry air. You got a lot of heat dome. I know Texas is desperate for rainfall. Usually cold fronts bring rain. Can't really promise you much rain with this front, right? I mean, there's not much water vapor to contend with this front. I can't rule out some 20% showers up here in a good chunk of Texas, but other than that, there's not much instability. You can see where the instability is going to be, right? Along the other side of the ridge, up here into New York, up here into essentially Massachusetts, into Connecticut here, up here along the coast, there's that boundary where we could be looking at some heavier rains. And yeah, there's your surface coastal low that could be off the Florida coast, just dumping some actually increased rain showers and storms for them. But there's your Monday high temperatures right now. So, you know, average high in Dallas 93, 94. So if you're, you know, 105s, a cold front drops you basically down to basically normal or just maybe 95 degrees, right? So, but, you know, like again, the cold front's not going to get sink that far south. It's still going to be probably triple digits around, you know, South Texas. I'm sorry, guys. It's just one of those times of years where that high pressure just continues to dominate. But the cooler game in town is back behind there. We got widespread 80s, and that's going to be feeling cooler conditions. We're not talking triple digits or anything like that, but that won't be until, you know, going into Monday of next week. So, but after that, I mean, there's Tuesday, right? I mean, there's the fizzle with the cold front, right? I mean, it doesn't really sink that far south. What's the big change is, you know, into the Pacific Northwest, where you'll have all those increased higher temperatures. Some of these areas could be in the 90s by then, by the time we get into Monday into Tuesday of next week. And that cooler conditions will be draped across Missouri, over Illinois. There's no hundreds underneath that. I mean, we'll be experiencing those a little bit cooler, you know, this is in the summer by now, so cooler is all relative this time of year, but not triple digit temperatures, right? So, but the big change going into the, you know, later midweek possibly is these waves that I showed you at the beginning of the video. These subtle 3 waves that are out there in the open waters of the Caribbean right now in the main development region will be traversing across, and I think the first wave will be sneaking in between the ridge of high pressure. So the high pressure will be moved over Texas and will actually shift a little bit further off into the western areas. That'll open the door for some of that Gulf flow, and I do think we'll have some heavier rains setting up shop into portions of the southeast coast, into Florida and off the Carolina coast by then, because it'll be in between these 2 ridge of high pressures. I mean, Texas just really can't buy a break. You're always in some areas, you're always in the vicinity of the ridge. So even at times it breaks down, you're still going to be over, the ridge is still going to be over you with a lot of sinking air. But the opening opens up the Gulf, and it opens up these areas into Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, going into the Florida Panhandle. I think that'll have increased instability, and these tropical waves will start entering the increased, you know, precipitation as we go deeper into the middle of next week. There's your overall 10-day temperature anomalies, right? So you can see predominantly for the next 10 days, we're a good chunk where the ridge of high pressure is going to be locked and loaded. The coolness with all the increased rain, and on the other side of the ridge, it's going to be feeling actually pretty nice up here in a good chunk of the Northeast. But the big change will be the Pacific Northwest and off the West Coast, where those cooler conditions you've been experiencing for a while now, I think those typically they're going to be, you know, winding down, and those warmer conditions are going to be moving in with the monsoonal flow still in full effect for a good chunk of New Mexico and getting into Arizona. And there's the big difference in some of the sea surface temperatures, and it's a little concerning going forward, because all that heat, I mean, all that heat along the coast is this is your 7-day sea surface temperature anomalies, where these temperatures have rapidly increased into the Gulf of Mexico, especially along the coast. Some of these areas off the coast of Louisiana right now are pushing 90 degrees sea surface temperature. I don't need to tell you, that's plenty of fuel fire. That had any sort of tropical wave enter that picture, that will only increase the rain instability into portions of Florida. But look at the cooler conditions off the coast here into the east, where they actually had some record low temperatures recently, and all the cooler conditions, obviously that lowers the sea surface temperatures along the coast as well. But here's the overall rain amounts for the next 10 days, and boom, your atmospheric river is pretty much shut off into the Pacific Northwest. But there's the monsoonal flow with the heavier rains over New Mexico, but I think they will eventually shift over to portions of Arizona. There's Texas for you guys. Pretty dry, I'm sorry. In Oklahoma and Arkansas, into that ridge of high pressure. These are in the next 10 days. Precipitation, just not much to speak of. But where the precipitation will be is right here along the combination of that coastal low, and then we'll have the combination of the tropical waves that'll be entering, getting near, and we'll have to see if they have some sort of tropical development by then. But look at all the increased rains with the heavier rains over portions of the Northeast, while a good chunk of the rain and much of the ridge will be dominating and move a lot of the heavier rains actually up into Canada. So, hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely hit the subscribe button if you hadn't already. And catch the next update where I protect you before and after the storm.